As we were singing that song, Sent from Heaven, God's Own Son to purchase and redeem, it reminded me that Good Friday isn't about rushing through to the resurrection. It's actually, that song tells us, about learning to sit in the sorrow. The song tells us that Jesus didn't bypass grief. He entered it. The song tells us, in a sense, that Man of Sorrows is not just a lyric. It's something he became for us. And he became that not just to suffer, but in a sense, he became that to speak the language of death itself, which is grief. See, on Good Friday, we are not to treat grief, the sorrow, as a detour on our way towards Easter. No, the grief is actually a part of the sacred moment. And it's sacred because grief is not a journey to get over. The New Testament tells us it's actually a language that we speak. And in fact, the more we learn to speak this language of grief, the more hope we can find in the Son of Suffering. So the idea today is pretty simple. Grief is not a journey. It's a language. Think about it. How many of you have ever experienced grief? It may be grief at the loss of a loved one, but we can experience grief also when it comes to the loss of a dream, the loss of a relationship. Whenever we encounter that kind of pain, we can find ourselves at least talking to ourselves, and oftentimes many people talking to us, as if grief is this road that we walk, and hopefully we will eventually come to a destination called closure. But anyone who has experienced loss knows the truth. You never really arrive. You never stop missing the loved one that you've lost. You never stop wondering what life would be like if they were still in it. See, if you think about it, journey and this language of journey, it always implies movement. It implies progress. It implies at some point you'll get there, at some point you'll actually get over it. But the reality is, if you've ever loved and lost, you know grief doesn't work like that. Grief is not something you get over. It's actually something you carry. It's something that becomes a part of how you live. And that's why when you read the scriptures, especially the scriptures about what we're supposed to do with the death of Jesus and the grief that he went through, the sorrow that he bore, you recognize that it is far better to see grief as a language, not as a journey. And like any language, the language of grief actually takes some time to learn. It's not something that you finish. It's actually something that we're supposed to grow fluent in. And that's why the worst thing that we can do on a Good Friday is actually rush over it and get to Easter. Because the reality is, in order to really truly savor the victory of Sunday, you actually need to know how to speak the language of loss, the language of grief. But in order to become fluent in any language, you have to be willing to speak it. Hands up, how many of you here speak a second language? And I'm not talking about a prayer language if you have one of those, okay? Okay, there's a few of us, right? I speak German, and I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about the fact that the best speakers of any language, right, you become fluent when you don't go quiet, right? In order to become fluent, you actually need to speak. And so Vipka and I were married. My wife is German. We lived 6 months in Wales. And then in about 1994, a long time ago, folks, we kind of moved over to Germany. And I got there on a Tuesday. And I was going to start work on a Monday as a cashier in a German bank. Yeah, the only problem was I couldn't speak the language. The good thing for me, however, was that my sister-in-law, who's an American, grew up was born in the east side of the state, actually grew up in Detroit area, but actually was raised in Tokyo. She'd married Vipka's brother, and so we were kind of moving there at the same time. And so the great thing was we both could learn German at the same time, right? If you're going to be a fool with somebody else. That's the best thing. So we had these, the German teachers who were Canadian, believe it or not. I guess Canadians have got more than one language, right? They were the Webers. Okay, I thought it was the Webers, but no, it's the Webers. And I found myself going to the first lesson with Mark and Laurie Weber, and there they were picking holes at one another because Mark was continuing, even after 5 or 6 years in Germany, to say the word minute, Minuten, instead of Minuten. They were so precise about everything you did. Well, this kind of preciseness kind of paralyzed Beth a little bit. In truth, she had a far better grasp on the kind of nuts and bolts of the language, but she just wouldn't speak until she said she would get it right. Me, I had to. I was working in a bank, and I mean, believe it or not, people actually talk to you in a bank. And so they would just talk to me, and so I just thought, you know what, I'm just going to go for this thing. Broken sentences, awkward phrasing. I'm sure I insulted more people than I greeted. But I just kept talking. The worst thing that happened to me was being there a couple of weeks, an old guy came in and he spoke this kind of dialect of a German, and I'm kind of going, what on earth is he saying? And he seemed to be saying, I want to buy some traveler's checks, right? The German with a traveler's checks begins with the letter R, writes his checks, and I'm thinking, okay, you must want some traveler's checks. And I said, so how many traveler's checks do you want? And he was like, traveler's checks. And he said the same thing. Ich möchte Reseapparat kaufen. Well, in my broken German, Reseapparat actually meant a raising apparatus. You know, that's a shaver. What kind of fool comes into a bank asking for a shaver? Meanwhile, the bank fills, totally full, and the phone rings, and I'm getting flustered. The phone rings. You don't answer the phone when you can't speak a language. Just trust me. But everybody was there. Everybody was laughing. I think they're laughing at me. I go to the phone, pick up the phone, muddle my way through the conversation, put the phone down, go back to the guy, and I say, so again, what did you say I want? What you want? And he said the same thing. Ich möchte Reseapparat kaufen. I want to buy a shaver. And I look at him. And he goes, oh, puts his hand into a bag, pulls out a shaver and says, I bought this thing off you 3 weeks ago and it won't work. And with that, one of my colleagues came up from the other side of the counter, tapped him on the shoulder and said, Herr Schlegel, you want the electric shop? That's next door. Everybody in the bank laughed. I kind of laughed at myself. And I just thought, that's the worst thing that can happen to me. And from that moment, I kind of became everybody's pet project. It was, go to the Volksbank, and there's the guy there who's learning to speak German. Poor guy, let me tell you the story. Why don't you just go help him? But I got fluent in German because I spoke it. I didn't speak it perfectly, but I tried. I want to tell you, grief actually works exactly the same way. You don't become fluent in grief by staying quiet, even if you understand it. No, you grow fluent in the language of grief by talking about it, by sharing the memories, by letting the emotions out instead of tucking them inside. But let's be honest. Some things are just hard to talk about, aren't they? Like when you've lost a loved one and somebody comes up to you and they say, so how's it going since? And then your brain scrambles because the answer, well, it isn't that easy. It's actually really complicated. So you just say, fine. But what you're really thinking is, well, I'm holding it together with prayer, caffeine, and a podcast I can't even tell you the name of. Or maybe for some of you, it's that awkward moment when you wonder if you've brought your loved one up too much. And you start to think, if I say their name again in this room, is that going to make it weird? And so you start to think, shouldn't I be over this now? So we go quiet. And it's not because we're healed. It's because we're unsure about whether we're even allowed to keep speaking. Listen, if you look at the New Testament language about grief and about the death of Jesus and about what we do with it, you just recognize that you don't get fluent in the language of grief by staying quiet. You get fluent in the language of grief by practicing it, even when it's clumsy, even when it's repetitive, even when it feels like all you can say is, well, I missed them. Good Friday actually invites us into that kind of language. It's not a journey we're supposed to rush through to get to Easter Sunday. It's actually a story of love and loss. It's actually a story of love and loss that we are called to retell over and over and over again, because it's in the retelling of the story that we actually remember. It's in the speaking out of the story that we actually learn to grieve. Grieve what? Grieve the consequences of pain, of sin, and death that we've all experienced over and over again. And it's precisely because we are willing to speak out our grief that we actually start to find hope. Tonight we sit in the grief of the cross, not just remembering that Jesus died, but actually learning to talk about it. Because death, especially the death of Jesus, is not something we're supposed to get over. May we never tire of talking about the death of Jesus. But Good Friday, this is about us learning to proclaim what this death means. And we do it with tears, we do it with awe, we do it with reverence, because when you speak of Jesus' death, you're not simply processing sorrow, you're actually participating in what the Bible calls redemption. Now, we do this every time we take communion, and we'll do that in a few moments, but look at 1 Corinthians 11:26. For whenever you eat this bread and drink this cup, you what? What are we proclaiming? Isn't that funny? We're actually supposed to talk about a guy who died. Wait a minute, I thought the culturally appropriate thing to do was just not talk about it. Oh, wouldn't a lot of people out there love us to do that? But notice what Paul doesn't say. He doesn't actually say, hey, do this quietly. He doesn't say, do it silently. Do silent reflection. He actually says, proclaim. Do you want to know what proclaim means? Proclaim. Declare, speak it out, make it known. Why on earth are we supposed to do that? Here's why, because love never hides. And grief, when it's spoken in love, do you know what it becomes? A witness to the power of that love. And when we speak of his death, when we speak of death itself, the death of loved ones, you know what we're telling the world? This matters. This love actually cost something. This death actually changed everything. And this grief needs expression. And love, real love, sacrificial love, saving love, resurrecting love, it always speaks. It doesn't go quiet. It always proclaims. And as I was thinking about all of this, I'm thinking, okay, what does this kind of proclamation look like in the New Testament? So I just started to do a study through the New Testament, the word proclaim, and it's okay, I'm not going to do all of them. I'm just going to do 3, okay? But look at this one, Matthew 10:27. And now remember, the context here is 1 Corinthians 11:26. We have to proclaim his death. Somebody's died and we're supposed to talk about it. Why? Because grief is a language. Look at what we read here. What I tell you in the dark, speak in the daylight. What is whispered in your ear, proclaim from the rooftops. In other words, proclaiming is public. It's bold. It's not something we hide away from, or it's not something we kind of keep to an inner circle. It's not meant to be tucked away into a private spirituality. It's actually meant to be declared out loud, boldly, in daylight, even from the rooftops if necessary. Doesn't stop there. 1 Thessalonians 2:4. This is Paul. We speak as those approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel because we're not trying to please people, but God who tests our hearts. So proclaiming the death of Jesus isn't actually about trying to impress anyone at all. It's not about performance. It's actually about the integrity of our faith. When we speak it, we believe it. When we silence it, do we believe it? See, it's about speaking because we've been entrusted with something holy, and our audience is always God. It's never other people. And then we get to Matthew 28, 18 through 20. We all know this one, right? Great Commission. It's what we're supposed to do. Go and make disciples of all nations, teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. This isn't a one-time moment then, is it? This is actually a lifestyle. Proclaiming the story of the crucified Christ isn't just something that we do to feel extra spiritual. No, talking about the death of Jesus is actually the mission of every Jesus follower. You could call it a long obedience in the same direction. Proclaim his death. Talk about his death. Grief as a language. So what is this proclamation then? Well, firstly, it's public, not private. It's bold, not ashamed. It's God-pleasing, not people-pleasing. It may come with suffering, not just applause. And it's a lifestyle, not a moment. Friends, tonight, this is how we proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. It's not with our theology. It's not with our lives. It's actually with our voices. It's with all of them. And so when Paul encourages us to remember the death of Jesus, that may involve silence. In a moment when we take communion, there will be a moment of silence, but I'm telling you, that is not silent. Remembrance always includes proclamation because grief always needs expression. And Dove speaks. And so when we proclaim Jesus' death, we're actually doing four things. Firstly, we remember. We remember. And we remember not as individuals. When we do it here tonight, we're actually doing it as a community. We are remembering as a community because his death matters. Secondly, we reclaim. In other words, we reclaim the significance of this moment, the significance of his death. We say, you know what? I believed it then, and I believe it right now. This is not history. This is present reality. We remember, we reclaim. We also reaffirm our love in that moment. It's kind of like going to the little box that you may have got of a loved one who's died and reaching inside and opening up one of those journals and just starting to read those old letters from someone we miss. We just reaffirm in that moment our love, and we cannot wait to tell someone about it. So we remember, we reclaim, we reaffirm, and lastly, we retell. We retell because we care. So why do we keep telling the story? Because love is never silent. Because when you love someone, especially someone who died for you, you just want to talk about them. Now, let's kind of turn the corner to practicality here for a second. Some of us hesitate to talk about Jesus too much because we kind of don't want to be that person, right? You know the one-track pony. Oh my Lord, here comes Greg again talking about that same concert he went to in 2004 that basically changed his life. Or Aunt Susan. You know when you go to Aunt Susan's house, it will actually take you less than 3 minutes to hear about her cat, Mr. Whiskers. Because every conversation involves Mr. Whiskers. And maybe you're here and you're thinking, Craig, I don't want to be that person who all I ever do is talk about Jesus. People are going to think I've got absolutely no range at all. But hey, wait a minute. If this gospel story is true, that when we recognize the significance of the death of Jesus, and we actually bring this death of Jesus to bear in our own life, what we realize is that his love actually impacts every single aspect of our lives. We recognize that there's not a facet of our life that his love does not touch. There's not a part of our life that he is not concerned about. Yes, your workday schedules. Yes, your family, your family conflicts, your favorite shows, and yes, the Michigan pastime of the weird weather. He's actually concerned about it all because it concerns you. See, the reality is life is full, life is layered, and wise people know that God's love invades these spaces too. And Jesus said, I've come to give you life and to give it more abundantly. And we are called to live in that fullness. And a loving, wise person knows when to speak, when to hold back, when to press in, when simply to be present. Because the reality is not every moment needs a sermon. But here's the truth. People who have truly loved and truly lost never get tired of talking about the one they love. Now, their love isn't always loud, but it's present. It's always there. It's always ready to be spoken. Think about it. How many of you have ever told a grieving mom who's lost her son, don't you think you've talked about your son too much? Of course we don't. Because when love is real, it naturally finds its way into the conversation. It's not forced, it just flows. So here's the thing. If tonight you've ever wondered, am I talking about Jesus too much? Maybe the answer is no. But maybe you're talking like someone who's finally fallen in love. Wisely, humbly, but with no shame. Because every time we proclaim his death, we say, he mattered. He changed me. He's not just in my past. He's in my present. And guess what? Until he comes, he will be in my future too. But there's another side to this too, right? If you've been quiet about Jesus, not because you don't believe in him, but because, well, maybe you're like my sister-in-law Beth, who just didn't want to say the wrong thing. You didn't want to be maybe that person, make things feel awkward. Hear this. Love doesn't need polish. It just needs presence. You don't need to preach a sermon. You just have to speak your heart from love. Because when you've been changed by someone, you will talk about them. It will flow. And you won't do it all the time, but you'll do it with wisdom. You'll do it without shame. And if you're wondering, okay, when do I start? Well, maybe Good Friday is the better time than any other time to start. Now is the time to basically talk about the death of Jesus again. And so grief is a language. And Good Friday is about speaking it honestly with hope. Not trying to wrap things up, not trying to rush to get to Sunday, not skipping ahead to the resurrection, but just sitting in his death, speaking it, letting it shape us. Because the more we speak of Jesus' death, the more fluent we become in the language of the hope the other side of it. The more fluent we become in the language of grace that we receive because of it. A language that reminds us that we are loved, that our sin was paid for, and that even in the silence of death, God is still speaking. Now on Sunday, of course, our language is going to shift. On Sunday, it's all about the resurrection. We will shout, we will celebrate. I will even move away from my pulpit. The tone will change. But tonight, we consider the full weight of his love. A love that did not hold back. A love that willingly carried a cross. A love that was so heavy, a calling that was so weighty that we are told he sweat drops of blood. A love that entered into that kind of grief. And why? So that you and I would never have to walk through that kind of grief alone. So friends, don't rush this night. Let's speak about the death of Jesus. Let's proclaim the death of Jesus. Let's remember the death of Jesus. And let's love him because of what he did on that cross. As I was thinking about how to wrap up this message, I was mindful of the fact that in a moment we're going to take communion. And what do we do at communion? We proclaim. We speak. And so I asked the team to sing a song that we're all familiar with. It's called How Deep the Father's Love for Us. What I love about this song is that it talks in the first person about the power of the cross. It was my sin that held him there. And what I love about this song is it just tells us the story. So what I want us to do is I just want us to speak the language of grief. I want us to proclaim the good news of the gospel. For some of you, it may well be the first time that you're doing this in a long time. But I encourage you, think about what Jesus did for you. And if that is your heart response, then just as we sing this song with us. And let us proclaim the Lord's death until he comes again. Stand with me, we're going to sing this song.